Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. Let me ask you a question. Is rap music? Yes, it is, unambiguously. Anyway, thanks for watching and thanks to our Patreon patrons for... Alright, fine. Let's do this. People have been arguing that it isn't since before I was born, but it's been popping up again lately on social media, and since knowing things about music is literally my job, I figured it was worth weighing in. Now, often this claim is presented not as part of a larger argument, but just as a self-evident fact, and if that's your view, then I'm not sure there's much I can do to convince you otherwise. Music is subjective, after all, and if your whole argument is it's not music, then the best I can do in response is yes, it is. But it's also not uncommon to see arguments based on the composition of the music itself, and that's where we enter my domain. Probably the most common of these is that music is defined as the combination of harmony, melody, and rhythm, and since rap is missing some of those elements, it's not, technically speaking, music. I should note that this isn't a definition that most music theorists I know would endorse. Ours tend to be a lot less prescriptive because music is a complex phenomenon that means different things to different people, especially across cultural boundaries. But I don't want to go too far down that particular rabbit hole because arguing about definitions is super boring, so instead let's see how this one applies to rap. I'll start with the easy one. Rap has rhythm. This is something even its harshest critics will usually concede, so I won't spend too much time on it, but I think it's worth emphasizing because modern rap is some of the most rhythmically complex music happening right now, at least in the world of pop. Like, look at the concept of flow. It's essentially a marriage between rhythms and rhymes that often transcends the underlying meter of the piece. If you want to read more about it, I've linked to a great paper in the description, but let's move on to a more controversial claim. Rap has melodies. And no, I'm not just talking about the songs where the hook includes a singer. See, here's the thing. The human voice is naturally melodic. Almost anything you can do with it has a definite pitch of some sort, and speech is no exception. In English, my voice raises when I want to emphasize something, and at the end of a sentence, it goes down. This is called prosody, and it's why monotonous speaking sounds so irritating. We're used to hearing those contours, and we miss them when they're gone. Of course, speech is different from singing. It relies more on approximate pitch with vague shapes rather than precise notes, but just because it's not singing doesn't mean it's not melodic. This may sound like a minor technicality, but it's not. Given how important they are to communication, I'd argue that mirroring human speech patterns is like the point of melodies. Or a point anyway. Again, music is complicated and the same tools can do lots of different things. But what rap does is it really focuses on that one aspect of melodic structure, adding percussive elements and articulations to emphasize its speech-like qualities. Make no mistake though, both the contour and range of the lines still matter. There's a lot more to rap than just talking. We can even compare it to techniques like patter singing, where melodic complexity takes a backseat to skills like speed and enunciation, or to the operatic concept of Sprechgesang, which also employs approximate pitch in order to deliver dialogue naturally without losing the musicality of the performance. There's links in the description if you're curious what those techniques sound like. So yes, rap has melodies. They're just spoken ones. Which brings us to the final piece, harmony. Does rap have chords? Well, some songs certainly do. Common's The People is a good example, and a great song. But here's where I do need to go back and challenge the definition, because the idea that harmony is a fundamental part of music is a deeply European invention. Someday I'll make a video about how Christian plain chant evolved into modern harmony, but for now what matters is that many musical cultures didn't follow that same path, and before Europe colonized the world, most music was what theorists call monophonic, which means it was just a melody by itself, or accompanied by some sort of percussion instrument. For a lot of the world, chords are a relatively recent addition to their concept of music. So with that in mind, I could grab any number of examples from other cultures to demonstrate that music doesn't need harmony, but instead I'll pick something a little closer to home, We Will Rock You. You know, by Queen. Yes, the guitar at the end plays some chords, but for most of the song it's just a single voice, or in the chorus, a melody doubled in octaves. The only other accompaniment is the percussive stomp-clap pattern, which doesn't add any harmony either, so if you're gonna stick to this definition, then the song doesn't technically become music until the last 30 seconds or so, and that's not something I think most folks would agree with. But that's not the only argument people use. Another common target is the use of samples, or short excerpts from other songs, usually looped indefinitely to create a backdrop for the artist to rap over. Now again, it's worth noting that not all rap songs use samples. Many of them feature originally composed beats that were written specifically for that song. But I won't deny that it's a common practice in the genre, and the three main complaints about it are that it's repetitive, that it doesn't use real instruments, and that it's just reusing someone else's work instead of creating new music. Let's start with repetition. These sorts of loops are reminiscent of a classic technique called an ostinato, where some parts of an orchestra, usually the bass, plays a short repeating pattern while other parts grow and develop on top of it. Pachelbel's Canon in D is a good example of this, but for something a little more recent, let's talk about the Verve's Bittersweet Symphony. Ignoring the vocals, the whole song is just a 2-bar loop. They bring instruments in and out to help define different sections, but they're all playing the same thing and they never stop. Ostinatos have been around since at least the medieval period, so it seems more than a little unfair to say that rap isn't music for doing the exact same thing. Next, let's look at the real instruments argument. This is, in effect, an appeal to virtuosity. It says that in order for something to be music, it must take technical skill to create, and on this one, I can't really argue historical precedent. After all, for most of history, all music was performed live on physical instruments. However, it's worth noting a couple things. First, for most of history, we had no other options. Recording technology didn't really exist until the 1870s with the invention of Edison's phonograph, and it didn't really take off until a decade later with Berliner's gramophone, so it feels unfair to judge modern music by the technological limitations of centuries past. Second, early samples were in fact manually produced, played on turntables by DJs who would have to jump back and forth between multiple recordings of the same track with precise timing. This isn't usually true anymore, but it's worth recognizing that loops are an automation of a real physical process, just like, say, MIDI is. If this counts as music even though I programmed it on a computer from recordings of individual piano notes, then samples should too. And third, I think it's a mistake to view virtuosity as the defining feature of music. This part is just my opinion, but I tend to think that music is about emotional expression, not technical skill, and artists should use whatever tools they have access to in order to make the song they want to make. And yes, that means I don't have a problem with autotune either. Tools are tools, and we should judge artists not on whether they use them, but on how. Which brings us to the last critique, that it's just lazily reusing another artist's work. Let's set aside for a second that doesn't make it not music, it just makes it someone else's music, and instead let's focus on the history of borrowing in art because it goes back a long time. Recontextualizing other people's musical ideas has been with us for basically as long as music has, but one of the most ubiquitous is Dies Irae, a Gregorian hymn about the final judgment. The first bar sounds like this, and that melody has been, borrowed by many composers to signify concepts like death and the supernatural, including Brahms, Haydn, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff. Look, Rachmaninoff really liked this melody, and it's still in use in modern film scores including The Shining, Dracula, and Nightmare Before Christmas. The point is that taking pieces of old music and using it to create new music has been a thing forever. The only difference is that now that we have recording technology, we can use the literal recordings too, but it's still recontextualizing. Check out I'll Be Missing You, Sean Combs' tribute to his dead friend Notorious B.I.G., which samples the Police's Every Breath You Take to tell a completely different story. So why does this matter? I mean, like I said, I tend not to be prescriptive in these videos. I'm not here to tell you what to think, I'm just trying to show you different perspectives and ideas, so why is it so important to me that you believe that rap is music? Well, this is one of those times where we have to recognize that music theory doesn't exist in a vacuum. Our ideas about music are shaped by our experience of the world around us, but they also shape those experiences. It's a kind of feedback loop, which means that the theories we put out there can have real material consequences, and in the case of rap, a genre pioneered by and largely associated with black people, it's not hard to imagine what those consequences might be. To be clear, I'm not saying that if you don't like rap, you're a racist, but what I am saying is that refusing to accept it as music represents a devaluation of the concept of African American art and expression, even if that's not your intent. And while rap is far from the only style invented by black musicians, it's worth recognizing that rock, disco, and even jazz all faced similar backlashes when they first showed up. Like, really similar. I've linked to a short PBS documentary about that in the description. So even though you may just want to have a nice philosophical debate about the nature of music, that debate can cause real harm if you're not careful about the cultural context surrounding it. Besides, there's much more interesting things to have that debate about than rap. I'd recommend starting with Cornelius Cardews' treatise. Now there's something that may or may not be music. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.